very close to a person establishment, very close to using it establishment, kind of try and using it the ground from kind of try and slide the ground from under the very peaceful, spectacular and very peaceful. But I think that the farmers are showing a great deal of wisdom and political spine, and I don't turn them over that easily with this kind of.
If you look at the issues that you have touched, so many of them, but there are also some fundamental. I mean, yourself, you said displacement is 33 million, 56 million in the first 50 years of Indian independence. You've spoken about, like I mentioned before, corporate fascism, the increasing corporatization of the media, and of course, Hindutva supremacism. The world also is not a very nice place at the moment. Many other countries also going through these kind of bitter shaking up from within. What sort of resistance do you see building up, considering you've been close to movements on the ground, very close to activists on the ground? You've seen how some of the protests and activisms have evolved over the years. What do you see as a writer, how things will evolve?
Well, these are, first of all, I think, although for the last 20 years, whether it's fiction or non-fiction, I've never seen myself as someone who necessarily writes about issues, It's always a way of looking at the world, and each thing one writes deepens your understanding about the next thing. It's not, I'm not a journalist, and I'm not someone who is just kind of commissioned to write things on different issues. It's half the time my writing is also reflective of my own understanding of these things, and it deepens my own understanding. Now, as we know, if I can just put it, conceptually, often the way I look at it is that there were, these two locks that were opened in the late 80s and 90s, the lock of the Muslim Market and the lock of the Bazaar. And they both sort of created two kinds of fundamentalisms, the economic fundamentalism, and then this kind of Hindu right-wing fundamentalism, which then produces its own cycles of violence in both ways.
Yeah.
And in both ways, both things led to this country increasingly becoming a police state, increasingly passing laws that could not possibly be called democratic, increasingly being a place where there are laws, but how they are applied depends on your caste, on your gender, on your class, on your ethnicity, on your religion, of course, So you're seeing the institutions of democracy just being hollowed out. And then when you begin to speak of these, and now we have a situation where, we have 63 of the richest Indians who own more money than the annual budget outlay for the union budget for last year, and you have like the Oxfam study recently, which said that during the lockdown, during the corona pandemic in India, the richest 100 Indians increased their wealth by 35%, while in April, we were hemorrhaging some 170,000 jobs an hour.
Yeah.
So, and then you have things like these farmers' laws, where increasingly that not just the wealth, but the control, the resources, the power is getting into fewer and fewer hands. Then you have the electoral bonds, which allow anonymous funding of parties. So you have a sort of hermetically sealed pipeline where money and the power is just going around and around in these very ever smaller concentric circles. And if you critique these, the BJP has now become the richest party in the world, I think. And then they'll turn around and say, but what is the alternative? Because we are then supposed to look for an alternative, a person with a bigger chest, or more money, or more power, another king, whereas we actually need to look for people who understand this country, who have a heart, who love the people in this country. We've become like a country of ordinances and ambushes and secret announcements, and you know the citizenry is being treated as if it's an enemy by the government,
Yeah,
including people who vote for it. Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
So we need to know that this kind of demagoguery, this kind of concentration of power is not what we want. So the alternative has to be to make space for ourselves by like the farmers movement or the CA movement. You know, we try to expand the space and then something torpedoes these protests and that space is shrunken again. But we have to keep expanding it at every level. I mean, at the level of resistance on the street, at the level of art, at the level of literature, at the level of cinema, at the level of political parties and political leaders and elections. We have to know that the answer to what is the alternative is everybody but these people is the alternative. Everybody.
What about our institutions then? We talked about our laws, and you talked about the kind of laws that are being passed, ordinance after ordinance. The last time we spoke was soon after the Bhima Koregaon first crackdown in 2018, and you expressed a lot of concern about Umar Khalid, and he's in jail today, and so is Stan Swami, and so is Varavara Rao, and of course G.N. Sai Baba, whom you write about so often. But it's of course about these individuals first, but it's also about that the parliament, to use the words of a young Kashmiri who spoke to me soon after August 5th, 2019, when he spoke about parliament being used to demolish democracy brick by brick, parliament being used to demolish democracy brick by brick. And there's a list of dark laws now, You have the Citizenship Amendment Act, you have the UAPA Amendment of 2019, and also of 2004 and 2009 before that. You have the farmers' laws, 3 of them. You have the labor codes, which, have overturned 48 pieces of labor legislation that gave some amount of dignity in the workplace. You have the Uttar Pradesh Damage to Public and Private Property Ordinance that is actually penalizing young rickshaw pullers or older rickshaw pullers for no crime that they committed, and their little holdings are being seized. You have the love jihad laws. Yeah. It's literally a government declaring its war on its own people through a process of majoritarian democracy. So therefore, the challenge, of course, is protest, of course, everywhere, but it's a very difficult period.
It's a very difficult period, and when you read history, you know that human beings have been through even more difficult periods, and we have to somehow get through this. I don't know what I can say in terms of, obviously in a conversation, I can't be like, oh, Arundhati, what is the solution? X.
No.
It's not that, All I can say is that as the breath is squeezed out of our bodies, our lungs have to expand as much as they can. We have to learn ways to keep these spaces open. We have to learn ways in which to continue to write and communicate what we need to communicate. And we really have to also learn ways not to spread hopelessness, not to spread despair. We have to learn, because so many people are brave, and so many people are so funny. So many people refuse to stop laughing at these kind of antics that go on. But essentially, I don't have any one solution. You look at what's being done to the film industry. How are artists supposed to survive if every breath you take has to be a cautious one?
Yeah.
Our business is the business of abandonment, of experiment, of thinking, of complexity, of contradiction. We're not like file pushers. We're not bureaucrats. We have to be allowed to make our mistakes. We have to be allowed to say things that people don't want to hear. And if we're not allowed, we have to do it anyway. We have to find ways of doing it, of surviving, of moving forward, moving back, moving sideways, and always taking that risk of pushing the envelope, forward. So I wanted to read something from one of my essays
Please.
about,
Yeah.
in fact, it's a part where I'm talking about Gauri. I just mentioned it's from a lecture that I had to do called it was a lecture designed to be delivered
Trinity. Yeah. I read that. Yeah.
Talks back.
Yeah.
So for some of us, every sentence spoken or written, real or fake, every word, every punctuation mark can be torn from the body of a text, mangled and turned into a court notice, a police case, a mob attack, a television lynching by crazed news anchors, or, as in the case of the journalist Gauri Lankesh and so many less well-known others, an assassination. Gauri was shot dead outside her home in Bangalore in September 2017. Assassination is the extreme end of the spectrum. Elsewhere on it are threats, arrests, beatings, and, if you're a woman, fake videos and character assassination. And not to forget the she should be gang raped threat. Attacks on people with a profile like me, whether they are wildly defamatory or absolutely true, or physical assaults on meetings and stages, or legal harassment with false cases, are usually appeals for the attention of the BJP High Command by political workers aspiring to promotion, a kind of job application, because it's well known that those who show this kind of initiative are often rewarded. Lynchers are feted. Those accused of murder become cabinet ministers. In keeping with the spirit, well, I'll just skip a little bit. Anyway, all this is nothing compared to what millions of people in India are having to live through. I mention it only in order to think aloud about how this continuous, unceasing threat affects writers and their writing. Each one of us reacts differently, of course. Speaking for myself, as the pressure mounts and the windows are shut one by one, every cell of my writing brain seems to want to force them open again. Does that shrink or expand writers, sharpen or restrict them? Most people, I imagine, believe it would restrict a writer's range and imagination, steal away those moments of intimacy and contemplation, without which a literary text does not amount to very much. I've often caught myself wondering, if I were to be incarcerated or driven underground, would it liberate my writing? Would what I write become simpler, more lyrical perhaps, and less negotiated? It's possible. But right now, as we struggle to keep the windows open, I believe our liberation lies in the negotiation. Hope lies in text that can accommodate and keep alive our intricacy, our complexity, and our density against the onslaught of the terrifying, sweeping simplifications of fascism. As they barrel towards us, speeding down their straight, smooth highway, we greet them with our beehive, with our maze. We keep our complicated world, with all its seams exposed, alive in our writing.
Thank you. On June 30th, 2017, that is 2 months and 5 days before she was shot dead, I saw and read a Facebook post by Gauri where she links to an article and she said, I love this novel by A. Roy. And she's talking about the Ministry of Unfinished Happiness and Utmost Happiness, Ministry of Utmost Happiness. And
yeah, she sent me I mean, just before she was killed, actually, she sent me a photograph of herself holding up this book, which I still have.
Yeah. And then I remember when you gifted me the book, and before that I'd read it, and I was just thinking about the graveyard and what you write about the graveyard there, and about the fact that the graveyards are mostly Muslim. And then suddenly I thought about Kavita. I suddenly thought about our Gauri's graveyard, because she's a Lingayat and she's buried, and so is her father. And Kavita has recently reclaimed even Parvati Lankesh's graveyard, just now, and she was there on the 26th of January. And then I thought of the word Azadi somehow, because it's there, of course, in your book, but also because what the word Azadi has come to mean for Indian politics and on the streets of India, following the JNU agitation and Rohit Vemula's death, and how the young student leaders were incarcerated. So language and protest and culture is also becoming quite joyful and very, very subversive. So it's also quite, yeah.
We have to find those seams, and expand them. And sometimes, there are times when the tide is rising, and you've got to know that you've got to secure yourself somehow. You've got to keep that faith, and then wait for the moment when it will pass, because it will pass. Whatever becomes of us, it will pass, and we will have to face it down. And we do have to read and remember people who have been through so much more than we are going through now, and have survived. And it's also, I think, we've got to understand that things like court cases and appealing to these institutions. If you read history, like one of the moments where Hitler was given a stage to perform on was when he was accused of sedition, and the judge gave him an opportunity to perform. So it really it was really something which sped up Germany's journey towards fascism and Nazism. We're up against something huge, and it's really, I feel that culturally, with music and art, with protests, with all these things together have to come. It'll never happen with some bureaucracy or some one case that we won, or some one enlightened judge that gave a good decision. Although the good thing about legal approach for me is only like you have done in Gujarat. Like whatever happens with the Assam case, the compilation of that documentation will be history. That's important.
I mean, that process is history, because that is truth telling. I mean, with all your acceptance that the institution is not just conservative, but often very archaic when it deals with evidence.
Yeah.
And particularly evidence which is like prized open from within Intelligence Bureau records and within a fire control room messages.
We have to keep the records. We have to keep the evidence, regardless of what happens. Times like the JKCCS in Kashmir does. It's been kind of almost shut down now because the evidence compilation is so threatening to the state.
And you have spoken about 8,000 to 10,000 disappeared in Kashmir with the graves there. Yeah. And we are facing something now, like something of that magnitude with the humanitarian crisis in Assam, where there are 2.2 million people who are completely facing the specter of statelessness, and no courts in the world. I mean, we've calculated and we find that if you look at the court solution, it'll take 234 years at the average with which our court cases go in this country. So there's no way a court solution is possible, because it's 2.2 million people with their families who are excluded from NRC, who are sorry.
No, and that calamity is what they wanted to import into the rest of the country with the NRC, CAA, NPR, So I mean, it's and you see, these man-made catastrophes from one after another, from demonetization to GST to just one after the other. They create and the whole abrogation of Section 370 in Kashmir has directly led to the situation in Ladakh, where the Chinese territory and the Indian government may not even bring itself to admit that that has happened. Meanwhile, well, you have an economy that is in negative growth. You have to hemorrhage money to keep troops on the border. Troops at sub-zero temperatures, battle ready all year round. People will just die. Soldiers will just die because of the weather conditions, even if there isn't a war.
Yeah. So, I mean, I just wanted to. Millions of people displaced. Now we're talking about a few million facing the specter of statelessness in just one state, and God knows how many million in the country. We're looking at, 46 crore, which is like 460 million people who are migrant workers, who are completely unheard of and unthought of in terms of policy. Till, the few weeks of the COVID lockdown forced the rest of India to look at them. So are we looking at the kind of a strange evolution of our democracy where policies are being made for just the very, very few, and you have a complete capture of parliament by those who are kind of in conjunct with, corporates and television filmmakers and studios, so that you're not just telling the story.
So, we know that, and we know how the election machinery is getting compromised. But at the same time, we have to ask ourselves, why is it that people are so easily persuaded to vote against their own interests, and this is the psychology that I think we really need to understand, because coming back to what happened in Germany, even when the Nazi Party's policies so clearly led to the destruction of Germany, when the Soviet Union, the soldiers were at the gates, when the Americans had arrived, and Berlin was falling, but still nobody blamed Hitler. Like, there wasn't such a uprising against him, other people were blamed, but there was this sometimes people get caught in a kind of psychology which is hard to explain, right? I mean, when Stalin died, people in the Gulag, in the camps, wept. People who he had put into the camps. So how is it that we are increasingly stuck, getting caught up in this? I mean, not we as individuals, but whole masses of people, I think that's a very troubling question.
And it's a question that is very difficult to find an answer to, because people try in different ways, but I think it's very difficult to actually, kind of clinch an answer to that one. But we find, for instance, there are moments of sheer breakthrough, like the farmers' protest show us, or the anti-CA protest show us, when other unities are forged and other realities come to the fore. But suddenly then after,
has a lot to do, if you look at the actual figures, of how many people actually came and voted for the BJP in the last election. 17% or something, But the mathematics is figured in ways that, allow a victory, even with just a small minority that has actually voted them in. They come into power in a majority, but it's a very, very troubling situation, where how is this going to break through? Because at some point you're going to see a country torn apart, a country that, there's the threads are wearing thin, even the ways in which this government functions. It's not eventually the anti-CA protests, the farmers' protest, none of it has gone away, even though it was broken up. The anger is simmering, and it's about much more, though the demands are to repeal these three laws. the rage is from much more than that, because you can see people in economic distress, uh, unable to see the future.
Yeah. And yet we've got a kind of crazy kind of beauty in our pluralism, in the way that we negotiate spaces at different levels, even with the cruelty.
That is it, ultimately I keep saying it, that this is a battle of lovers against haters,
Yeah.
It's a battle, like none of us would be would be fighting if it weren't that we loved something about here, if it weren't that we were fighting to save something too. We are fighting to change things. We are fighting to also preserve things. We are fighting for the love of the land, for the love of the landscape, and you have this continuous hateful divisiveness, which is what is keeping them in power right now. But I don't think that it can last much longer, depending on the scale of history that you choose to.
Well, I only sometimes think of caste, and I think that caste has lasted for the longest time, and it's one of the most brutal systems that we've allowed because of its continuing and perpetual value. Yeah.
It's a form of micro-fascism, where it works at every level to keep the big structures in place. And when you look at the people, the dynasties that own the big corporations, when you look at the media family dynasties, you see a situation where a very small caste class elite controls all resources, all money, all decision making, and as I said, funnel and the pipeline funnels it through the political elite, and the money goes round and round, the power goes round and round, and it has for centuries for sure. But that doesn't mean things have not also changed.
No, you had a Phule, you had an Ambedkar, you had a Nanak, Kabir. Before that, Basavana and Karnataka, who actually threw open spaces historically, even though they were faced with killings and genocide as reprisal. I somehow tend to keep coming back to this question with you because I did it last time as well, but I'm going to because it's about Kavita Gauri as well. That and I really was very, very impressed by that one first essay that I read of yours, which is the Great Indian Rape Trick, which I think was 1993.
Yeah.
And particularly because I remember a lot of very, very important conversations happened because of the celebration around Bandit Queen, and many of us were quite repulsed by that film. And therefore, that essay, I think it was in the Sunday magazine that you wrote it. Yeah. And so that's for me when Arundhati Roy, as a writer and as a critique, has stayed as a name. Would you just like to talk about that a little bit? Because you look at that, you look at the Hathras case, which happened last September, and that hasty cremation, and then look at the series of violent crimes in Uttar Pradesh at the moment against young girls and women, particularly Dalits, and it's just such a...
you can see how, even the kind of patriarchy and misogyny that is intrinsic to this regime is becoming institutionalized and keeps appearing in the speech, in the ordinances, in all of that. Madhya Pradesh wants women who are not living with their families to register with the police. You have, and as you said, the laws of, I was looking at the UP ordinance against religious conversion, and while obviously it's openly hostile to Muslims and Christians and so on, if you look at what it's saying about women, and it also equates women, Dalits, and scheduled tribes with minors. In fact,
so no agency at all
whatsoever. And yes, and the Bandit Queen essays, the Great Indian Rape Trick. When I saw that film, obviously I'd read the book that it said it was based on, And I saw with what glee they showed Poolan Devi, who, as we know, was one of India's greatest bandits. She was the one bandit the police could not find. She eventually surrendered. She negotiated her own surrender, which they reneged on. But in the film, she's never shown as, it's a film that turned India's greatest bandit into history's most famous victim of rape. And how much they loved those rapes, showing them again and again, some of which we don't know whether they even happened or not.
Yeah.
And she has a very interesting account of her own life in the diaries that she smuggled out of prison. And then I met her and I spent quite a lot of time. She was an interesting person. She was not some virtuous goody kind of feminist activist at all. Like she was a bunch of trouble, but it was very interesting. So that was what I wrote, and I also said that nobody should have the right to show the rape of a living woman without her consent. Even if she was raped, she should be able to tell you, and she should be able to decide, even if she wanted it to be shown, how it should be shown. So yeah, those were things. But like now, you see a regime that somehow is less outraged by rape than it is by transgression of love.
Yeah. And finally, I want to end with a little bit of Kerala, because there's so much of Kerala in you and in your work, particularly your first novel, and Kerala responded in a crazy way to Gauri's killing, as it would and expectedly should. And if one thing that Kavita has done in the last so many years, 3.5 years since I've gotten to know her even more closely, is just go to every single meeting called in every single part of the country, because young women are saying, that we want to be Gauri and we identify with Gauri and we are Gauri. So what is so special about Kerala?
But they don't want, they should not, the killing is such a...
Yeah. Absolutely. No, but the fact is that, I didn't mean that. What I meant is that the response from young women activists and journalists and writers and filmmakers to a person like Gauri has just kind of transgressed every boundary. I go to a little place in rural Maharashtra and I find a special edition of a weekly being brought out for Gauri. I've just not seen that kind of resonance. And it's not as if the Narendra Dhabulkar or Govind Pansare or Kalburgi also did not do spectacular work. Of course they did. And each one of them, and even those who are incarcerated. But it was something about her and her personality and her ability to reach out that I think has got,
her Azadi. Azadi. I think that, for young women to see people like her embrace life, to realize, to fight, to laugh, to live the full spectrum, even if it means that you die with a bullet. I think it's liberating for young women, and it puts some steel in their spine. It gives them something to hold on to, and that is so very important.
This has been such an important conversation, which we've been wanting to have with you for a long time, Arundhati, and thank you so much for agreeing to it. Kavita and I also were keen today there was a little something that Kavita did, for months after 2017, every other morning, after a very difficult night, I would find one of these poems in my mailbox, and she wrote these poems to her sister. And as a very special gift, CJP made a little booklet out of it and gave it to her on the first anniversary of the assassination. And I'll send it to you. I'll send you a few copies. And we just thought, it's been there, and we just thought we'd also sort of officially release it, re-release it again, because we want more people to read the poems. And before I ask Kavita to do that and to say a few words about the poems, or maybe read the poems, whatever she likes, I just want to say what I said in the at the introduction of the book, that not only do we miss you, Gauri, but so does the young man at the saloon in Raja Rajeshwari Nagar who cropped your very stylish hair. Because your friends have met him and he really misses you. And you're a fearless tigress kitten. And this is from your loving sister. Kavita, it's over to you.
Thank you, Tista. Thank you, Arundhati. It's wonderful, Tista, for organizing this.
Thank you. Thank you for meeting me here.
Yeah.
Lovely meeting Arundhati again. Because it's ironical that Gauri was a great fan of Arundhati, and she had never met.
Yeah, we used to talk about. She would I think she would always translate the things that I wrote. Yeah.
Articles and books. And Tista, of course, she's so much in love with you, and she'll tell me all about you. And it's nice to know that today, tomorrow being her birthday, Tista, you organizing this is wonderful. And I keep wondering many times what would she have said during all these 3 years and 2 months. Keep wondering what would Gauri have said during maybe CAA or your fight in Assam, or now the farmers' agitation, what's happening, how would she have reacted? Would she have gone and stood with the protesters, started writing, things like that? And then I wonder, including Umar, who she was considered her son, and Jignesh, who won the election. Kanaya has become so close to us during these many years, and he's very close to my daughter and me and my mom. So it's become a very transformative life for me as well. And especially with you, Tista, it's become like, you become another sister to me, the missing, part of Gauri. And I keep wondering, as just now Arundhati said, I would ask Gauri also, if not the big chess, who is the bigger chess, who is the alternative? And now Arundhati has given a very good answer to that, actually, saying that,
we want a bigger chest. We want a team of intelligent people.
Yeah. And anybody but them, like you said, yeah.
Yeah, it's wonderful listening to you. It's almost like listening to my sister. I'm glad people like you are there to voice out these things. And I've heard Arundhati speak, and you speak fearlessly, and admire it. And I hope I do through my films, but apart from that, to speak openly, I still don't. I can't. So
read one of your poems.
You just have to be yourself, Kavita, and that's enough. And
people like you are there, and thank you for organizing this. And as you said, it's a wonderful book what you got out, and it's with pictures of me and my sister, and it's very beautiful. I don't know if the poems are great or bad or whatever it is. It was just.
They're very good. They're very, very good. Can we show the book, please, team? Yeah, can we show the book? Yeah. We just show the book.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
And through CJP, and it's beautiful. Some of the pictures, especially, are very, very nice. Yeah. So, I don't know. I never thought of myself as a poet, though. I keep telling my father, you named me wrong, because a Kavita, I was very bad at poetry. But I don't even know whether there's poetry or what, but it's just my feelings and my anguish when I lost her, and it was painful to sleep or painful to even think, So it's been kind of therapeutic to have people like you and with me, and hearing all of you talk. And
I just think that in the Ministry of Utmost Happiness, eventually it all happens in a graveyard where someone builds a guest house called the Jannat guest house, and in every room there's a tomb, and death and life then become like separated only by an osmotic membrane, and we just Gauri in the other room,
Yeah.
You got to talk to her and.
Yeah. Thank you so much. It's wonderful. And
will you read a poem, Kavita? Will you read a poem? Or you don't feel up to?
You read it, Tista. You're good at it. You read whichever you like in it.
I just chose these ones, if you don't mind.
Please, anything.
She's written a beautiful one, which I'll take the liberty of reading. It's called The Last 10 Seconds. Sometimes I feel you are here. It's just one of those hectic days. So you haven't visited us. But most times reality punches in my gut and I know you are gone forever. I turn, I shiver, I reel. I feel like puking, but my stomach is empty, much like everything else. Agonized when awake, nightmares in sleep. As I try to relive your last 10 seconds, that's all the time it took to end your voice. The cops tell us, let me imagine those 10 seconds. The killer, a coward no doubt, hiding behind a helmet, rushes towards you. Yako, what are you doing, Magani? The first shot, you boli Magani, who the fuck are you? Not my comrade, not my blood, certainly not my creed. You think you've become big because your chaddi got longer and now you wear pants. Come end me, let's see. How dare you? I'm never ending. 10 seconds, 3 more bullets, and you were gone. Did Isha, Amma or I flash through you? The love, the care, the concern. Did thoughts of your comrades flicker in you? The same comrades who converted you from a little chirping sparrow to a roaring tigress. Till a last bullet stopped it all. You lay there in a pool of blood, but have you stopped? 1,000 others continue your fight. Here, there, everywhere. Every drop of your blood, a protest. With more fervor and vigor, confusing me further. If I voice for the voiceless like you, am I you? If I am silent, am I dead?
Thank you, Tista. That was beautiful reading it. Thank you.
Arundhati, would you just like to say something more?
No, I just say that, we're so lucky to have someone like her in our life. She expanded us, and I think we'll remember that. The Azad Akka.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Arundhati, for your patience and listening. Thank you so much, Kavita. Yeah, big hugs, Kavita, to you too.
Thank you, Tista. Thank you.
Bye. Yeah. Bye. Thank you, team, for everything. Yeah. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.